Prayer of odd thanks for nurses, witnesses, attendants, bringers of peace, brilliant technical machinists, selfless cleaners of all liquids, no matter how horrifying, deft finders of veins, when no veins seem available, soothers and calmers and amusers, tireless and patient and tender souls, brisk and efficient when those are the tools to keep despair at bay, those with prayers in their mouths as their patients slide gently through the mysterious gate, never to return in a form like the shriveled, still one in the bed, feeders and teasers, mercies and singers, they who miss nothing with their eyes and ears and fingers and hearts, they who are not saluted and celebrated and worshiped as they ought to be, they who are the true administrators of hospitals and clinics, for it is they who have their holy hands on the brows and the bruises of the broken and frightened, they who carry the new infants to their sobbing, exhausted, thrilled mothers, they who must carry the news of damage and death to the family in the waiting room, they whom you know, each and every one, glorious and lovely in their greens and blues and rainbow clothing, they who are you in every tender touch and quiet, friendly, gentle, murmured remark, they who are the best of us, bless them always and always, mercy, for they are the clan of calm and the tribe of tender, and we bow in thanks for them, and so, amen. I was getting prepared for this day. I thought it might be interesting to go to the Gospel of Mark, which was the first gospel written, and see what kind of healing stories are in the Gospel of Mark. So, of course, I did what you would do. I Googled healing stories in the Gospel of Mark, and there was a list of them. And so I went through to my Bible, and I highlighted all of them. And as I was highlighting all of the healing stories in the Gospel of Mark, I was shocked by how many there were. Now, I can tell you after 30 years of doing sermons and preaching from mostly the Gospels through those 30 years, not very much shocks me about the Bible anymore. But when I highlighted all those stories, that's the word that came to mind. It's just shocking how many stories there are. And so I'm going to read just a few of them. They start from chapter 1 in the Gospel of Mark. And then, of course, they were copied over into Matthew and Luke as time went on. But these are just a few of the healing stories. Chapter 1, verse 13, verse 23. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching with authority? He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." Verse 29. As soon as they left the synagogue, they entered the house of Simon and Andrew with James and John. Now Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they told him about her at once. He came and took her by the hand and lifted her up. Then the fever left her, and she began to serve them. Verse 40. A leper came to him, begging him, and kneeling, he said to him, "If you choose, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him and said to him, "I do choose. Be made clean." And immediately the leprosy left him, and he was made clean. Chapter 2. When he returned to Capernaum after some days, it was reported that he was at home. So many gathered around that there was no longer room for them, not even in front of the door, and he was speaking the word to them. Then some people came, bringing to him a paralyzed man, carried by 4 of them. And when they could not bring him to Jesus because of the crowd, they removed the roof above him, and after having dug through it, They let down the mat on which the paralytic lay. When Jesus saw their faith, he said to the paralytic, "Son, your sins are forgiven." And he stood up and immediately took the mat and went out before all of them, so that they were all amazed and glorified God, saying, "We have never seen anything like this." Chapter 3. Again he entered the synagogue, and a man was there who had a withered hand. They watched him to see whether he would cure him on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man who had the withered hand, "Come forward." Then he said to them, "Is it lawful to do good or to do harm on the Sabbath, to save life or to kill?" But they were silent. He looked around at them with anger. He was grieved at their hardness of heart and said to the man, "Stretch out your hand." He stretched it out, and his hand was restored. Chapter 3, verse 7. Jesus departed with his disciples to the sea, and a great multitude from Galilee followed him, hearing all that he was doing, and they came to him in great numbers from Judea, Jerusalem, beyond the Jordan, and the region around Tyre and Sidon. He told his disciples to have a boat ready for him because of the crowd, so that they would not crush him, for he had cured many, so that all who had diseases pressed upon him to touch him. Chapter 5. One of the leaders of the synagogue, named Jairus, came, and when he saw him, fell at his feet and begged him repeatedly, "My little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her so that she may be made well and live." So Jesus went with him. And a large crowd followed him and pressed in on him. Now there was a woman who had been suffering from hemorrhages for 12 years. She had endured much under many physicians and had spent all that she had, and she was no better, but rather grew worse. She had heard about Jesus, came up behind him in the crowd and touched his cloak. For she said, "If I but touch his clothes, I will be made well." Immediately her hemorrhage stopped. Well, it just goes on and on. Chapter after chapter, stories of Jesus healing people. And for 30 years, I don't think I've preached 5 sermons in all that time about Jesus healing people. And the reason I did that was because, like you, like many of us, we know about faith healers, and we have and are skeptic about them. On Saturday, no, I guess it was on Friday, I was driving home and I heard on NPR a magician who was interviewed, happened to be from England, and I didn't tell you this, David, but it was on NPR on Friday, and I can't remember the magician's name, but he was kind of a soothsayer and a prognosticator, and he played with people's minds in that way, told them their future and all that kind of thing. And he said, I thought about becoming a faith healer, and so I did a little bit of study, and he said, I knew that it wasn't going to work or anything like that, but I wanted to see how people would react. And so he started to do these faith healing things. And he said, unbelievable as it was, some people were healed of the different diseases or maladies that they had as they came to see him. And so his skepticism about that kind of decreased in time. So today, as we're going through and trying to figure out who Jesus was, I invited Dr. David Robinson to come and speak to us out of his own experience as a doctor for over 30 years and what he's seen and how his faith plays into his medical practice. And I hope that you will enjoy what he says as much as I have over these past couple weeks. So David, come on up. All right, let's see. I've got number 2, Monica. There you go.
Oh, I think this one will work.
Oh, you got that one working? Okay. Good. All right. Can you hear me? Why not? I might have turned off. There we go. Got me? Yep, got me. All right. Now, About a week ago on Friday, we hiked, and a number of us from the church, and so David and I were walking or hiking together for a little bit of that time, and we were talking about a number of different subjects, but he said to me that he was retiring on August 2nd. That was his last day of retirement, and so we started talking about what he had experienced over that time a little bit, and how his faith played into that, his time as a physician. And so today, we're going to ask a few questions, and then at the end of this time, then I'll go ahead and take a microphone out to you, and so you can ask some questions of him also. So I just would have you share a little bit about your background, David, and where you went to school, and of course, how you came to become a doctor.
Okay. First of all, I wanted to explain my garb today. This is, they're scrubs, but this happens to be the uniform of the nurses that work in my office. They all dress in the same color uniform, and each day it's a different color. And I was so happy that Pastor Rusty's prayer was really a prayer about nurses. And I think it's important for everybody to know and acknowledge the real important role that nurses, physical therapists, respiratory therapists, medical assistants all play in the caregiving process, because we doctors are really just a small piece of it when taken together. But that's not the reason for the scrubs. But as far as Jesus' healing ministry, I heard about that from when I was in Sunday school. And when I was Pax's age, my grandson there, he's 3 years old, I was going to United Methodist, well, back then it was Methodist Church, but the Sunday school curriculum was every 2 years. You kind of went through the Bible. So I'd heard the stories of Jesus' healing and the miracle and the wonder of it was well ingrained in me as a child. But in 6th grade, we had some medical missionaries come to give a presentation to the collective Sunday school. And and they kind of framed their medical mission in a slideshow, showed how they took people at death's doorstep, emaciated people with malaria or really bad skin diseases, all of which in general could be easily cured with modern medicine, medicine for malaria, or even just clotrimazole cream on a fungus infection. But they would show the before and after pictures, and it just really impressed me about how much good these people were doing for people that were underserved. And at that time, my involvement was no more than putting my quarter of offering in the plate for these medical missionaries. But they framed that whole healing in a light which I could understand, as it was more compatible with my evolving scientific hubris, was that the church was the body of Christ, and that it was through our work together that we achieved these, what were miraculous healings of people who otherwise would never see those healings. So I didn't know I wanted to be a doctor then. I just knew I thought that work was awesome, and I was very willing to contribute to it. But in high school biology, I realized I really liked the human body and was fascinated by how it worked and everything. And so that's when I decided to be a doctor and start working toward that in high school. And because of the medical missionary presentation, I thought it would be good to be a doctor to the underserved. And so that was the trajectory of my career goal, and as an undergraduate in Duke University, and then I went to Washington University in St. Louis at medical school, went to residency in family medicine in Phoenix, Arizona, and then went to a community health center in Brownsville, Texas. I worked there for 8 years with a predominantly Latino population. And then in 1990, I moved to Salt Lake City, again to work with community health centers. And so I get to be a doctor, use some scientific knowledge, and help bring care to the underserved. The community health centers are a federally funded or partially federally funded organization, which is our Band-Aid on the inequality of healthcare in our nation. And so I've been honored to work for community health centers for a long time and help folks that are less fortunate.
Thank you, David. As we were talking about it, I saw all these stories, of course, in the Gospel of Mark, and there's paralysis and spirit possession and mental illness and blindness and fever and leprosy, and a withered hand is stretched out, and the woman who was hemorrhaging, and deafness and speechlessness, and at least one general report. I think there are more in the Gospel of Mark about Jesus healing a variety of different diseases. And so when you see that list or hear that list, what springs to your mind? What just grabs you about that?
Well, I guess the first thing is that so many of the diseases that were described are conditions that we have today. Epilepsy, paralysis. We have female troubles of bleeding. Super common things we see in the office, regularly. And we have the means to effectively deal with a lot of them. And some of the ones, though, that I think are remarkable where Jesus was healing people who were paralyzed or couldn't talk or were blind. Occasionally we see those things today, and they're not due to any physical malady we can put our finger on. In other words, you can scan them, do MRIs, and you can't really find anything. But people generally, they can't walk, they can't talk. And we call those, in the time of Sigmund Freud, it was a common condition of hysteria, where people would have these deficits that were extremely severe, but weren't due to anything easily remediable. But psychoanalysis sometimes would help that. And I love hearing stories from my son. He went into medicine too, against my advice, but he's a neurologist over at Intermountain. And he's occasionally called on to see such patients who are can't walk, and the family's all upset, and he can't walk. And my son has the benefit of an extensive scientific workup, and they can't find anything wrong, and so he suspects it's one of these somatoform. It's the brain, but it's blocking the ability to walk in ways that we don't fully understand. And so he'll go through this kind of progressive, contemplative, meditative approach, and in the emergency room, gradually bring them back to talking or walking, oftentimes in front of the family. And he uses his position as authority, right? He says, now look, you're in this hospital now because the hospital that sent you here wants us to help you get better. And so you're going to need, and he uses the thing, you're going to need, as hard as it is, to do what I say. And so he'll work them through and get them either talking or walking again. And he'll say, it may only be temporary, you don't get frustrated, it'll come back. And so that kind of illness, which he's able to fix, is certainly the kind of illness that Jesus would even perhaps more powerfully be able to fix, based on the culture that he was addressing and the authority that people were willing to give him.
it seems to me both the expectations that people had that he could heal them after these first beginnings, and then, of course, his authority, both playing together as part of the rationale for all these stories that come out in the Gospels. I saw these are the things that he used to heal people. These are the different ways that he used. And I just made a list of them. He lays his hands on people. He speaks to people. He put his finger into someone's ear and helped them to hear. I don't know if there's wax in there or what. He touched his tongue and the mute was made to talk. He put his saliva on a blind man's eyes. People were healed by touching the fringe of his cloak. He mixed spit with mud and applied it to someone's eyes, just to list a few of the techniques. And so I asked David before, have you ever used any of those techniques? So what do you think?
I never spit in the dirt and put blood on somebody.
Okay, that's good to know.
But I have touched ears. People have a bad habit of using Q-tips to try to clean their ears. Instead of doing that, they pack the wax in there, and then they can't hear. Sonia, I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. And so, we can get a little curette, and pull that plug of wax out, and all of a sudden they can hear again. Yeah. So I have touched ears.
It's a miracle.
Yeah, it's a miracle. But comes with an admonition: stop using those Q-tips. I think one of the things that the people who are flocking to Jesus for healing, I think a lot of the motivation or the mindset of those folks is the same mindset that a person comes to see a doctor. What they want is the magic of healing, okay? The magic of healing. And that magic for us is maybe not, hocus pocus magic, but it's a prescription, okay? That's what a lot of people are in. Doctor, I have a terrible sinus infection. I need an antibiotic, okay? And sometimes that's appropriate, and we give a prescription. Magic of healing, okay? A lot of times it's not the right thing to do. If it's a cold, you probably should be advised, just tough it out, it'll get better, take some Tylenol, you'll be okay in a few days. I could also use the magic. I could give them the antibiotic, and in all likelihood, they'll be better in a few days, and I get the credit for it, okay? The undeserved credit, okay? But that same mindset, people were hoping for healing, and that's what people hope for with a doc, and they hope that we have something that they haven't already used that's going to help them. And so I really think it's very similar in the mindset. The difference is we have science to actually affect cures in ways that they didn't have back then, but that science itself is what people look toward for the magic of healing. It's different.
We talked a little bit about when we were hiking. I asked the question, do you ever pray with your patients? And I know that some doctors would not do that, but you said that you did sometimes. And so would you talk a little bit about that?
Okay. Well, I think a lot of doctors, and me included, have a lot of scientific hubris. It's like we're so smart, we know so much biology, we can, affect cures. But I think we all, and a lot of those doctors will say they refuse to pray or acknowledge an afterlife or with patients who are in serious illness. Because they feel they'd be hypocrites, paying homage to something that they don't believe in and is a false hope. But I gave up that hubris, and I'll tell you why. When I was in junior high, and this is when I'm thinking about, well, what am I going to do with my life? For entertainment, my brothers and I used to turn on a TV, and we watch in the morning. There was this show, it was Oral Roberts, okay? He was a televangelist. He could heal people on TV. And, people in wheelchairs and crutches, and he would, put his hands on me. He'd be very dramatic, and with his prayers. And the patient would get up and walk out, and it was just miraculous. Well, my brothers and I thought this was just total malarkey, and the way he played it up so much, we would just laugh at it. It was like entertainment, just to make fun of the whole thing. Okay, so in medical school, this is many years later, right? In my 20s, I go down to Guatemala as part of a rotation at Washington University. They had community medicine with the Mayan Indians. Okay, now that's a course that gets noticed. And it happened to be a rotation through the hospital where Aura, my wife, worked. And so I go down there and I meet her and I fall in love with her. She invites me to her church and starts sharing some stories of her family. And one of them is the following. Her dad, who worked as a lineman, got struck by lightning. Now, to me, that's like no fault of his own. He's in the line of his work, struck down by lightning, very seriously ill, loses his kidney function, and is in a hospital for a very long time, with the doctors finally telling Aura's family that he's going to die. And but during this illness, they had sent a letter to Oral Roberts, and this is my future wife telling me, in a little town in Guatemala, that she had corresponded with Oral Roberts, okay? This guy that I used to laugh at on the TV. And so she, as she tells the story, they get a letter back all the way to the little town, Chimaltenango in Guatemala, that he was going to pray for her dad and that he knew he could be healed if they would just all get around the radio together as a family with their dad on a certain day at a certain time, and he would pray. And sure enough, the family listening to Oral Roberts, translated into Spanish, going down the list of all the people he was praying for, and that sure enough, over the radio in Guatemala, they hear, and I pray for the healing of Tomas Fuentes in Guatemala City. Okay? Well, he lived, walked out, went back to work, okay, for many years after that. Still has where the lightning hit him on the hand. It was always a little bit withered. Couldn't get that fixed. But it was, to hear that totally erased all my hubris about ridiculing people of faith, because it means a lot to them. And for me to participate and go along with it, I see no victim in so doing. And so when people are at death's doorstep, I think that's the most useful time. If they are people of faith, believe they're going to heaven, let's go with it. It's an awesomely comforting thought for people in that position. And so I'll sing with a patient, I'll pray with the patient, and encourage them on that new adventure they're going to go on.
I'm going to give you an opportunity. We just have a few minutes left, so I'm going to give you an opportunity just to ask a couple questions. So if any of you have a question that you'd like to ask David, I've got handheld number 2, Monica. Help.
I'm an old nurse from the Hospital of Sick Kids in Toronto. I'm very concerned when sin is implicated as a relationship to a disease. There are miracles, and they're scientifically based. When I started training, there was no cure for leukemia. It is now, 92%, Dave, curable. Polio was devastating. It is now cured by scientific basis of producing a vaccination. it concerns me that people are kept in a quandary of hoping their paralysis is going to get better when it's not hysterical. I just can't. I used to pray, but I used to pray for children to die quickly because they were going to die. And I didn't get answers to that either. So it's really difficult for me. Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Thanks, Helen. Those are the questions that I have too. Sometimes when you hear people say, this prayer is helping, we're just going to keep praying, and then it doesn't help. Then, David, what happens? What's your thought about that?
Well, I think the problem with life is that there's things that are beyond anybody's control, even using prayer. There just are. The only thing certain in life is that we're all going to die. That's the only thing. How healthy we are, or how much we suffer or don't suffer or rejoice before we die, that's highly variable from person to person. But I just think that prayer is important in trying to establish as much wholeness as we can with the time that we have. Now, wholeness might mean accepting a condition which is not remediable. It might be that. And that's one of the hard messages we as docs have to give sometimes, is that there isn't a remedy. But, and that accepting of that misfortune is going to make you stronger than trying to constantly find a cure.
Others, we'll take one more question. Ray?
I was curious to know what your experience with near-death experiences in patients was, and how you feel about it, your opinions regarding those experiences.
Well, I guess my experiences sometimes, especially earlier on in my career in Brownsville, were quite negative, because a lot of the folks that I would see that wound up dying died of what could have been curable diseases, but they did not have access to the care needed to save their lives. So this is in the early 80s. I had my own almost hospice care before that was really much of a thing, seeing patients that I had taken care of but couldn't access them to appropriate care, that died at home. And it was very sad for me to let somebody go in their 30s of cervical cancer that could have easily been cured had she had access to care. So now, as far as like the death experience itself, my job, as I saw it, was to make it as comfortable as possible. So I used a lot of morphine, and hopefully their transition was made more comfortable by that, and I encouraged family to be at bedside as much as possible. So I'd say that was early on in my career. Later in my career, to be honest with you, it's been taken over, the death experience has been taken over by professionals, I think, who are way more capable of dealing with that appropriately, the hospice folks.
Do you have questions? Donna, do you have a question? All right. I'll run back there like Chris did.
I got a big enough mouth I can hear.
No, you use this.
David, what do you think about there, but for the grace of God, go I?
Say it again.
There, but for the grace of God, go I. What does that mean to you?
I think it's a call to compassion, that what befalls one person could befall any of us. And I think it's one of those things that hopefully tempers the scientific hubris that I can have, or the sense of moral superiority, perhaps, that we often feel. And I think as a doctor, certainly, you see a lot of things befall patients that they don't deserve, okay? You see a lot of things that are because of their behavior. But I think the important thing is to remember that we're all human, and we can all fall into the same unfortunate circumstances and need to have compassion for those folks.
Evelyn?
How have you, as a caregiver, through these many years, been able to deal emotionally with the inequities in our society or world society of care and poverty, available medicine, all of that, and you know, emotional, physical suffering, and the inequalities in our lives?
Well, I think my decision to go into community health center medicine is the answer. That's how I felt I could be a doctor and be more responsive to the needs of the underserved. And, you know, working for community health centers, you don't really cash in on being a doctor quite as much as you might otherwise be able to do. But I think that's the big part of it, choosing to do community health center work. And partly by having fun, I would come into my office very often and address all the nurses and the support staff, the social worker, the clinic managers and everything. I would refer to them as, you know, I'd say, "Good morning, comrades. Remember, we are the vanguards of socialized medicine. Power to the people." And, you know, they wouldn't go along with me too much on that, because I think despite working in community health centers, some of them were Republicans, but anyway, you had to have some fun with it, I think.
Absolutely. Others? Larry?
I just want to agree with David that there's some things, many of you know that I'm a veterinary pathologist, but I've learned a lot about human medicine and pathology, because over the years I found that veterinarians were physicians, but they were never trained to be, because the one example I can never forget is that one veterinarian called me, and this dog had a melanoma, and it was an oral melanoma, and it was going to kill that dog. And I said, well, you know, the best thing is to encourage euthanasia, you know, what we can do. They said, we can't do that. I said, why? The owner has melanoma too. So what do you do, David? I've learned that over the years, we have to all be physicians where we can be. And the other thing, like you said, some of the things that happen in this world we can't control, and you have to learn to work with it and try to support, as you said. I didn't get to pray very much with people over the telephone, but we would talk about how they could support things. So I hope that's a help to people.
That's good. Thank you, Larry. Question? Well, David, I just want to thank you for being willing to share from your perspective about Jesus the healer and some of those healing stories that some of us have had problems with through the years, or at least to try to see them from a different perspective, from a healthcare professional's perspective. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Every day they pass me by, I can see it in their eyes. Empty people filled with care, headed who knows where. On they go through private pain, living fear to fear. Laughter hides the silent cries, only Jesus hears. People need the Lord. People need the Lord. At the end of broken dreams, He's the open door. People need the Lord. People need the Lord. When will we realize people need the Lord? We are called to take His light to a world where wrong is right. What could be too great a cost for sharing life with one who's lost? Through His love our hearts can feel all the grief they bear. They must hear the words of life only we can share. People need the Lord. People need the Lord. At the end of broken dreams, He's the open door. People need the Lord. People need the Lord. When will we realize that we must give our lives for people need the Lord?